Blakey rubbed the artificial compressed wood grain of the door along with the violin bowing. "Don't. Yet I will." Pushing the door open elicited the final disapproval, a hearty creak of neglect. The room was dark. More afraid than when facing a shape, Blakey stepped in with his eyes closed. His chest heaved, unready to turn on the lights. "Little man, dragon slayer, why are you so afraid?" The memory replayed in his mind just as it had done hundreds of times before. The high, shrill scream made him jump out of bed with his heart lodged in his throat. Storming to her room, he found the door locked. He turned it so hard the knob broke off in his hand. When he kicked the door open, a horrible beast held his precious daughter in the moonlit bedroom. It stood like a thief caught in the act. Time then slowed to a standstill as the curtains danced in the night breeze. Alice's face was frozen with shock and confusion. Then in a blur, the horrible creature burst straight out her window as if the night were fishing for children and it was the hook being reeled back in. Gone in an instant. Gone before he could do anything. Gone before he could even process what he was seeing. Sometimes in his imagination he would finally get to move and reach for her before the unchangeable outcome. Sometimes he wrestled with the demon before it vanished along with his daughter into shadow. Sometimes the shape smiled, laughed even. Sometimes it spoke, calling him brother. The door to her room had remained closed ever since. After her mother left, no one went in, especially Blakey. Flipping on the lights, he waited a moment before opening his eyes. Alice was in the center of the room in front of a music stand practicing her violin. Blakey stood defensively, expecting a heavy jolt to finally end him and all this pain. Instantly dizzy, too soon to be the whiskey, he had to sit on the foot of her twin bed, compressing it comically. For a childish moment he refused to look at her, smiling as if everything were fine. He instead looked to the folded clothes on her shelf. Her mother had done that. Every item of Alice's clothing was washed and folded, waiting for her return. They were soon covered with dust. Alice played the piece of music beautifully. He didn't know the composer, having never paid enough attention to the constant shuffling of music assignments to distinguish one from the next. He regretted that. "There we go. Must really want it all tonight." "Right this way, sir. Your marinade awaits." "Who are you?" he thought. "I am you, we are we, it hardly matters," the voice answered. So cruel, as is the life of art. Your preference, cruelty, easier than love, lonely life of pity and pain, the horn of plenty, abundance of pain. Indeed. Who was this voice? Why was it so present in his mind? He panicked at tumors. He panicked at cancer. Blakey took a sip of whiskey, hoping for dullness. Making a cage for a monster had pushed him to the edge. He knew what was coming, so the sip turned into a swig. Heat danced down his throat, fooling his stomach and nerves that everything was fine. She had yet to turn around to face her father. She haunted the house on and off, but he never interacted with her. He was afraid that it would be an acknowledgement that he had lost his mind, or worse, that she was dead. Eyes tearing up, his head slightly turned away, he waited until she finished the piece and turned for applause. Blakey smiled with the tears streaming down his face. He set down the bottle to properly clap. She took a formal bow and then looked at her father with a confused expression. "Dad?" "Yes?" "When are you going to find me?" she said with a blameless tone. Blakey then lost it, hunching over and weeping into his hand, his giant bulk heaving. "I don't know." Her little hand touched his shoulder. "It's all right. I'm sure you will." She handed him her violin and dove into her closet, looking for her treasure chest. an old jewelry box filled mostly with cheap rings and coins that only a child would find valuable. Blakey gently put down her violin. It felt wrong in his hands. He got up to leave, feeling worse for talking to her than to himself. "Hey, Dad?" she then asked. "Yes?" Returning, he dared to reach out, extending his shaky hand to touch her head. "How much are these worth?" Alice held up 4 1968 Kennedy half-dollars, the only items of worth in the box. His response required considerable focus. "I would say about 20 each." "Wow, that's $80. She thought, "Well, I don't need 4. Here, you take 2. That way we both have a pair, and they can be lucky." The coins jingled in his hand. She spun around and darted out of the room. Blakey closed his eyes, unable to look at her as she called from the other room. "Dinner ready?" "Not yet," he replied almost to himself, but she was already gone. Blakey clenched the coins in his fist until they hurt. Pocketing them and stepping out into the hallway, he checked for her. Of course there was no Alice, just the broken TV set, a pitiful slap of reality. Blakey knew why he kept the broken TV. As tormenting as her appearances were, he couldn't cope without her presence. She liked the TV. It worked for her, broadcasting for her 6-year-old tastes. Quite simply, he feared that getting rid of the TV might mean getting rid of her. Everything of hers had been kept perfectly in place. Blakey swallowed the growing lump in his throat as if it were ballast, and fresh tears beaded down his cheeks. With Blakey, his face never tightened up in an ugly sorrow mask. The muscles in his face were never allowed to join in. Having trained them after so many condolences, so many sympathetic head-tilting frowns, and so much judgment, he would not give in to such loss of control. Through the growing downy blanket of alcohol, he was able to put everything on mute, even his insistent cell phone, which buzzed, dancing in circles on the counter, begging to be stomped to bits. He knew what the call would be, but he refused. "When do I get a day off?" "When you find her, Professor. There are no timeouts for the missing." Later, the fire in the backyard was underwhelming, waiting for a monster carcass to fuel it. He debated killing the shape in his basement cage and burning it before it could escape and kill him. He felt on the verge of a fatal mistake. All the King's forces and all the Queen's tens can't stop Blakey from going nuts again. His back wound pulsed as if it had its own separate heartbeat, and he was terrified to check on it. The infection had reached his mind. The voice was proof. A timer had been set, and he wondered if he would even realize when his time was up. The enormous build-up of ill-pressurized insanity escaped one violent guffaw at a time. The bonfire's flames danced higher as a perfectly timed breeze came in, and the sound of wood crackling drowned out the applauding crickets and frogs. Blakey screamed and threw the empty whiskey bottle into the fire. Smiling to himself, chuckling and sputtering in growing fits, he swayed his head like a radar, searching for relief. Then he laughed, primarily because he knew that if he didn't, he would crumble. So he stood there for hours, mesmerized, waiting for signs of a victor in the battle within his mind,